Ever snap over something small and wondered, why am I doing this? What happened? Right? If you've ever had one of those parent attitude moments, it could be just frustration that's mounted over time, but it could be also linked to how you handle your emotions. We've all seen those Karen moments, right? Someone losing it over something small like a wrong coffee order or waiting too long in line. But what if these overreactions are more than just entitlement? For people with BPD, these kinds of intense emotional outbursts can be part of daily life. It doesn't mean that they're a Karen, first and foremost. But we're talking about that Karen attitude, and we're going to see if there's a link between the so-called Karen attitude and BPD and why these reactions can feel so overwhelming. More importantly, I'm going to share some strategies as we go through this to help you manage those emotions before they take over. So we're going to start with overreaction to perceived flights. Imagine someone at a coffee shop ordered a drink, and when they received it, it wasn't exactly how they expected. Now, the person might feel intensely wronged or disrespected, going beyond a simple request for a fix. And instead, they make loud complaints, demand to speak to the manager, and feel like the entire experience is a personal attack. And that's what's important here, is that something that was general, a simple mistake. You make mistakes, I make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but we internalize it. And then we blow it out of proportion because we've personalized the situation. Now, for someone with BPD, this reaction can stem from deep feelings of rejection or invalidation, so they're always boiling underneath the surface. And even small mistakes can feel like major betrayals. Like, I get it. I totally get it. And the intense emotional response isn't just about the coffee. We know that. It's about feeling unseen or unimportant. And this can trigger a lot of deep-seated fears of abandonment, rejection sensitivity, or even emptiness. And it can all be housed in this feeling of inadequacy, which gets spiked up, presumably over the coffee. So when we see the Karen experience or the Karen attitude, we could be like, hey, man, what's wrong with that person? They're losing control. But we don't recognize or we don't realize that there's stuff underneath the surface. And a lot of people with BPD, and remember, I'm not saying people with BPD are a Karen or act like a Karen or have a Karen attitude. But what I'm saying is that there's stuff going on and there's always kind of brimming underneath the surface. Well, what can you do about it? Well, a helpful approach is validation and mindfulness. Now, people with BPD often benefit from feeling heard. So offering a calm and understanding response tone can help de-escalate that situation. Now, on a personal level, individuals can practice this emotional regulation through techniques like deep breathing, mindfulness, to recognize when their emotions are getting amped up so they don't overfocus and explode on what is a seemingly small issue. Now, that mindfulness, you can do it with a cup of coffee, actually, right? You get that cup of coffee and, just hold in that driving response, right? That driving need. And I know that that's tough. And I know you feel driven. Have that response, or you're ignored, or you're unheard, or you're invalidated. Hold on a minute. So what I want you to do is I want you to hold it. That's what I want you to do. I just want you to hold it close. Then when you get the coffee, then I want you to wrap your hand around it. Feel the warmth in the cup. Feel what the cup feels like. Is it soft? Is it kind of like a little firm? We hope so, because I don't want you to spill it. And then just focus on that. And just remember, everybody makes mistakes, and a mistake that you happen to be on the receiving end of doesn't mean that it was intended for your demise. Very, very important. Even though your BPD and family in the head is going to tell you that, recognize that it is not something that is specifically directed at you. Now, next, let's talk about unstable relationships. Now, imagine that someone goes into a restaurant on a regular basis, and at first, they love the place and the staff, but one minor incident, maybe a server forgot their usual order, completely changes their view. Suddenly, they think staff is disrespectful and incompetent. even though the relationship was just fine a week ago. And what happens is they're looking for trends. And we see this a lot in individuals with BPD, and they end up responding in like a Karen-like attitude because they're holding that in, right? And they see that one incident. It's disrespectful and they're incompetent. But again, it's really overly focusing on that one specific issue, making it into the biggest issue. And this can really tease up a lot of relationships and cause a lot of issues and problems. Now, this kind of black and white thinking is really common in those with BPD. We call it splitting. And I do this with my clients all the time, that they split. Whenever I hear that they're splitting, I always go, split, right? I don't necessarily say it that flippantly, but we do that and we talk about the split and that tendency to split, because often you see it in individuals with BPD because they idolize someone one moment and then they devalue them, feel betrayed by them, and hate them the next. And this can be due not really to a sense of entitlement, but these intense emotional shifts where feelings of connection or safety can be quickly replaced by feelings of abandonment or betrayal. And it doesn't mean that it's actually happening. See, we got to remember. So in one of my books, in the Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook, I talk about what's called a BPD lens. And this is like a distorted perspective. It's like putting on glasses that distort your perception of self and other. And BPD does that because it manipulates how you think and it encourages that maladaptive response. So what I want you to do is, when a situation feels overwhelming or someone's behavior feels hurtful, I want you to use tools like a grounding exercise or even distraction techniques. This could be like taking a short walk or just listening to music. This can help prevent a lot of emotional extremes from controlling the situation. And that's really important. It's also useful to challenge that all or nothing, that splitting mindset. And you can ask yourself questions like, was this moment just a bad moment, or is it truly the end of a relationship? Now, I use an example of a restaurant, but imagine coming home, right, after a day of work. And if you're tired, you're even at a higher likelihood to split as well. And that's super, super important. And it doesn't make you a Karen, and it doesn't mean, oh, you have this entitled attitude or anything like that. That's not what it means. What it means is that when we're tired or we misperceive situations, that gives our BPD and family in the head time to kind of sneak into our brain a little bit and really amplify the negative. And that's where BPD gets fed. And man, is it always hungry. It just eats and eats and eats and eats and eats, right? And we fall into that. Those who have BPD fall into that. I see it a lot with my clients, that there's a particular instance and they blow it up, whether to the positive, that idealization, or the negative, devaluation. Now, the next is intense mood swings. Now, we would think that this is inherent in that Karen attitude, but picture someone calmly speaking to someone in customer service, but after a minor hiccup, maybe being put on hold too long, they explode into anger, demanding compensation or threatening to never shop here again, or I'm going to get you. I'm going to show you what it's like. And they just amp it up. Their emotional reaction seems out of proportion to the situation. Because what's happened is that you've moved yourself from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. And who's in the driver's seat? Your emotion. And your emotion always wants to be that car driver, right? That race car driver that's like, go, 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 go. And so it intensifies your mood and it further distorts your perception. All of these are they are absolutely cumulative, and they continue to build on one another. And that's what we see with individuals with BPD, personality disorder, or even those who rely on that Karen attitude, that Karen perspective too much. Then what we see is that they're constantly having these mood swings. They're constantly letting their life be determined by their mood. Now, for people with BPD, emotions can flip dramatically from one moment to the next. We understand that. That's part of the disorder. But the smallest frustrations feel overwhelming, and this leads to that sudden burst of anger, right? And it can seem like an overreaction, but it's how they're experiencing the situation emotionally. But again, remember, you don't want to leave the driver's seat. The driver's seat is you in control of how you respond. Don't respond to that inner speak that's saying, oh, they're taking advantage of you. Oh, they're doing this to you. You're going to over-personalize it. And that's the problem that we see, right, with a lot of like Karen attitude kind of responses. That is that people are over-personalizing situations that aren't really personalized. People make mistakes, that you're on hold too long, that it doesn't fit with your expectations of the situation. And that is really, really important. We're going to talk about need for control next, but what's your management strategy here? Now, to handle mood swings, emotion tracking can absolutely help by keeping a log of emotional triggers and reactions. Someone with BPD can start to see those patterns and find ways to prepare for and manage those intense feelings. For example, like at work. So if there's somebody who really kind of activates you and sets you off at work, then you know, oh, when I see Paul, I know that Paul is a beep and he always gets me going, right? So now we know, okay, Paul sets me up, right? Then there could also be, if you're tired, also look at those internal states too. If you're tired, if you're confused, if you feel unseen, if you feel sad, depressed, anxious, whatever it may be, monitoring those emotions, those feelings that you have can really help you manage those mood swings, and it can keep you in the driver's seat instead of that race car driver of your emotions, which is just going to get you driving straight into a wall. And using these self-soothing techniques can also be critical, just like we talked about that mindfulness, using the cup. That can be really great. Also, deep breaths. It's the easiest thing to do, but so many people don't do it because we get amped up, right? When you're that race car driver, you're not thinking about slowing down, getting a hold of yourself, managing yourself in a more effective way. But that's what you got to do. I know it's tough. I do know it's tough. I absolutely do. But understand that this is a critical component that can help you manage that situation more effectively. Now let's talk about that need for control. Imagine someone who always insists on being seated in the exact same spot at their favorite restaurant. If their usual spot is unavailable, they might get upset and demand, if feeling distressed, until they get what they want, which means they go at it, right? So you put yourself in the boxing ring and you just start pounding at them, right? Pow, 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 pow. And you're just letting them have it. And what can happen is that you can then take it out on like the wait staff or somebody else who had no control over that. They didn't know you were coming. They happened to put somebody in that seat. And again, what we're doing is we're personalizing a situation that probably isn't directly and specifically about you. And that is super duper important. Now, for someone with BPD, this need for control comes out of fear and anxiety. Makes total sense. Having control over their environment can feel like a way to manage that emotional chaos. When something is out of their control, it can trigger that vulnerability, which leads to strong or often negative reaction. And that vulnerability can absolutely trigger rejection sensitivity, emptiness, and abandonment fears. Absolutely. So we get that. But we've got to recognize, again, it goes to personalizing a situation that isn't directed personally at you. And that's really important. Now, how would we manage this? Well, we got a practice called radical acceptance. And this can be a huge game changer. This is something I do with a lot of my clients. And this means that sometimes we have to accept things as they are in the moment. Less than ideal, because sometimes we're in some pretty crummy situations. But, for instance, and to really kind of expand on our example, somebody could remind themselves that while not getting their usual spot feels uncomfortable, it isn't a personal attack. And they can still enjoy the experience. Setting small, flexible goals can also help gradually reduce the need for complete control. And who really has complete control? And by doing that, by recognizing that you have control over the moments and those situations that you're in to varying degrees, isn't a bad thing. It's a reality. It's radically accepting the situation that you're in. You want to really be as impactful as you can in various situations, but we also have to recognize those limitations that are inherent in all situations. We have to look at that. There is no complete control, but that doesn't mean that you're in a vulnerable situation, that people are always out to hurt you. And I know it feels that way because BPD and Family in the Head plays that game with your mind. I get it. And it can drive you to have a caring attitude, a caring response, but I want to discourage you from that. Now, while there are certain traits of a caring attitude, and they may appear similar to behaviors associated with BPD, they're driven by different factors. Now, the emotional intensity of BPD comes from deep-seated fears and sensitivities, not entitlement and malice. Understanding this can foster empathy toward individuals with BPD. This channel is built on destigmatizing these individuals, and it is important that we recognize that sometimes when people are responding, this doesn't make it okay, right? Because we need to control our own behavior. Like, I get it. And people with BPD, it's harder for them to do that, but they can learn the skills to do that. BPD is the most successfully treated personality disorder. So it's important that we embrace that concept, recognize that concept. It's critical because that allows us to see them clearer. And when they feel like there's a safer environment, or when you feel, if you have BPD, that you're in a safer environment, it helps to see things more authentically. Now, if you're managing BPD, don't forget tools like mindfulness, emotion tracking, distress tolerance, radical acceptance. This can make a huge difference in how you navigate those emotions and relationships. At the same time, friends, family, people that you interact with. Hopefully they offer this validation and patience. And I know it's tough. I know it's really hard. You may also find benefit by my BPD online course, which is for individuals with BPD to build that insight, to really get a handle and hold on a lot of those maladaptive beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that cause so many issues in your life. It is possible to manage this disorder. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.